Good afternoon, everyone. It's Sunday. I took most of yesterday off and only did one stream. I will probably be doing a couple today, but I have to litter in some organization in my house as we finish our final stages of our remodel. All right, so the newest season of Marriage Bootcamp started on Friday, and if you are a reality show junkie like me, this is one of my favorites. And I love this show because I love to see interpersonal relationships behind the scenes of the people that are on some of the shows that we watch. The newest season features some very familiar faces, perhaps some of the bigger names that have been featured on this show thus far. There's been some other reality stars that have been featured, however, not to this magnitude. Hard to say, I guess. Let me just double check. I'm having some issues with my stream health here. Why is this doing this? I'm buffering here. Are you guys buffering? Okay. All right, so sorry about that. I'll have to edit that out. So Marriage Bootcamp Reality Stars is one of my favorites. I actually just like all the Marriage Bootcamps. It doesn't even matter if it's Reality Stars or if it's the Bridezillas. I loved it when the Bridezillas were on there. I have watched nearly every season of this show since it started. I remember all the way back to where it wasn't Dr. Ish as the primary therapist. It was a couple that were married that did this boot camp. So it's been on for quite a few seasons, and this season is perhaps got some of the bigger names because we are on this season featuring, and I'll introduce them to you. We've got Aaron Carter and his mother Jane. Aaron Carter, obviously we talk about him on this channel. He is currently in the middle of sort of I don't even know what's going on with him, whether it's addiction or some sort of emotional sort of meltdown at this point in time, dealing with some really heavy issues going on in his life. And his mother Jane, the relationship between them is front and center in this specific season. Jane managed Aaron while he was a child singer and star. Aaron, if you're not familiar, made several albums, did multiple tours, was featured on Nickelodeon, did a lot of stuff on Disney. Even though going through what he went through now, he was a pretty big child star when he was much younger and started performing when he was 7 years old. And then we have Corey Feldman, which is probably the biggest name that I have seen on this series ever because he is a actual movie star. He hasn't made any movies recently, but he was a humongous child star in the 1980s. He was featured in the movies like The Goonies, Lost Boys, Stand By Me. He was also did a couple movies with his friend Corey Haim, who is now passed on. And when I was a child, it was the Coreys. The Coreys were like the big thing, and Corey Feldman was a part of the Coreys. He is joined by his wife Courtney and his brother Eden, and he and Eden both were performers, and their childhood is featured prominently. And it seems to be that they both have a lot of unresolved issues, and that sort of creates a unhealthy dynamic between the two brothers, and Courtney seems to be stuck in the middle of it. We have Alexis Bellino from The Real Housewives of Orange County. She was featured several years ago when she was married to her husband, Jim. She and Jim have gone through a divorce at this time. If you remember, she and her husband, Jim, were devout Christians, and Jim basically had the opinion that women should not do anything outside of the home, outside of being like a mother, a nurse, a taxi driver, a servant to the man. A woman's place was in the home. Tamra Judge famously named her Jesus Jugs because Alexis had was a little bit judgmental with other people, and people thought she was slightly phony about her overt Christianness because it didn't sort of match. Tamra believed that it didn't match her outside aesthetic. She is joined by her mother Penelope, and they will be working through some issues related to her childhood where her mother and father got divorced when she was 12 years old because her mother cheated on her father. Alexis has 3 children, She's got a 13-year-old and twin 12-year-olds, and her children have also gone through a divorce at the same time. And so she said that she is repeating the mistakes of her mother, and so they are going to be working through that. And then we have Laura Govan and Michael and Gloria, her parents. Laura is most well known for Basketball Wives Los Angeles. She was not actually a wife of a basketball player, but played college basketball and was connected to all of the Basketball Wives. She also coached on the collegiate level. And so she's been in several reality shows. She's had quite a lot of tabloid headlines between her and her family. Her parents, I'd say, most notoriously took her children without her permission to Lake Tahoe, which created this massive issue in the headlines. And she also told her father that she was molested as a child, and her father didn't believe her and called her full of shit. So these are the characters that I will be speaking of. All of them have quite the backgrounds, but in this first episode, it was for sure Aaron and Corey that were front and center. So we have this kind of like, it starts off with everyone going up the hill, getting out of their thing. And the theme of this season is a road trip. And they have to get to a destination, and they all arrive in like really broken down station wagon, a really old RV, a super old like van, and then Aaron and his mother arrive like in an old convertible. And Aaron arrives, and he has, his biggest thing is he says he has trouble trusting his mother. He's been performing since he's 7 years old, and part of his childhood was that his parents declared bankruptcy when he was still performing. They got divorced. They spent all of his money, and his mother has had a very public fight, she's had some arrests. She was actually arrested for breaking into her ex-husband's home and dragging his then girlfriend off the bed and attacking her. She has a lot of notoriety for being the consummate stage mom. She was famously interviewed by Barbara Walters on 2020, and they accused her of being in it all for the money. And she's also battled alcoholism. Actually, both Aaron's parents battled alcoholism. And then Alexis Bellino arrives, and she's with her mother along with Laura Govan. They all arrive at the same time. And then suddenly Corey Feldman arrives, and it's like the biggest celebrity they've ever seen kind of thing. Like, everyone's just like, Laura is like, oh, Corey's gonna know who I am. Our kids go to school together. Like, I used to sit back with his kids when he was late picking them up. And like, Corey walks up to her, and he's just like, I have no idea who you are. And Laura's just like, Corey tells everyone that he has issues with his brother because everything happened after he left home at age 13, and he was emancipated from his mother at 15. And once he left, his brother had to become the breadwinner for the family. And he said resentment built from there. Corey said only recognized Aaron Carter, and Aaron obviously recognized Corey. Now, interestingly, both of these men have had public comments about Michael Jackson, and both had relationships with Michael Jackson. Aaron recently said that he had some inappropriate contact with Michael Jackson, or made the implication, and Corey was defending Michael Jackson after the Leaving Neverland HBO documentary came out. So it'll be interesting to see if anything related to Michael Jackson comes up in this specific season. So when they get into the house, they go and they look around the mansion. It's the same house they've been using for all of the seasons. Laura says that she and her parents feel completely out of place. She doesn't trust anyone. And she's like angry that her dad never believed that she was molested. Corey explains that his brother became the breadwinner when he left, and his brother resented him for it. Aaron says the same thing happened to him after Nick left. So they're all sitting in the kitchen when this is happening. And Aaron basically explains that after his brother Nick, who's famously Nick Carter from the Backstreet Boys, left to go on tour with the Backstreet Boys and left the home, his parents put him to work, and then he became the family's cash cow, and they stole his money. Alexis in the kitchen basically explains that her mother cheated on her father, and that caused her to have an eating disorder, and then she went back to school and got a job, her mother did, and which therefore then caused her to become a mom at age 12 to her mother, which on the surface, none of that makes sense to me. I'm hoping that they get into that, because I don't know how your mother getting divorced and going back to school makes you a parent to your mother. So I hope that we get more from that, because that statement on the top of its head doesn't make sense to me. But then her mother actually says to her, well, that follows what I did, because I became my parents' when I was 11 years old. And then Alexis was like, you need to break the cycle, Mom. So as they're getting to know each other, they're all like sort of bragging about their careers. Aaron's like, I've sold 75 million copies of my album. I was a pop star. I did all this. Blah, 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 blah. And then Corey's like, I've been in 100 movies. I've been doing this. I've made all these television appearances. I'm the most famous child star actor ever. Like, it's pretty clear that Corey and Aaron are still very much rooted in their childhood and the fame of their childhood. And both of them, Corey is 48 years old, and he is still talking about this as though it just happened. And Aaron, now 31, seems to be kind of going through the public meltdowns that we've seen with other child actors now at 31. Jane says that while they're talking about this childhood stuff, and Corey's discussing like all of the travesties that go on with being a child actor, he says that he has no childhood, and he is not like, he doesn't support parents that put kids into the limelight and have them like act and perform. And Jane, Aaron's mom, was like, well, I look at this a little bit differently. I think if a child has interest, you nurture it. And if they're very talented, you don't have to really do anything. You just let them do what they want. And Corey made the point, you could just nurture it by, letting them have a normal childhood and getting them some acting classes or getting them in plays that are not so in the spotlight, and then allowing them to make the decision as maybe teenagers when they're a little bit more self-aware and have the capability of making the choices to become performers. Corey actually became a performer at age 3. Imagine that. And Aaron started his work at age 7. Both of them clearly had no childhood. So as they're doing all of this and they're done getting to know each other, Laura is kind of rolling her eyes because Corey's like front and center and doesn't let anyone talk, and it's like clipping back and forth to Corey bragging about everything, and they couldn't. And then Alexis was trying to remember who Laura was trying to figure out who Aaron Carter was, and she said that he was in the New Kids on the Block. It was pretty funny, actually. She had no idea who he was. And so after that, they go into the main room, which is sort of where they do their first exercise. And if you're familiar with Marriage Bootcamp, this is where they get sort of their starting gifts of what it is, what is their symbolism for being at Marriage Bootcamp, and what is it that the doctors feel like they're going to work through. And so as they get into the main room and they go through the introductions, the doctors basically explain that this is going to be the road trip. They're at the gift shop, and they're giving the cast gifts as they go through all of this. Aaron Carter is the first to go up, and he pulls out of his gift bag a cash cow. He is immediately emotional when he sees the cow and begins breaking down. He starts crying, talking about how his father often referred to him, both of his parents referred to him as the breadwinner, the cash cow, the person making all the money for them. He talked about how working as a child made him away from his family a lot. He felt like he had to raise himself. He blames himself for his father's death, for his sister Leslie's death, and he blames himself for his family sort of falling apart and his parents' divorce. As Corey and his brother Eden are listening to that, they can actually relate, and you can see that Corey becomes extremely emotional while he's listening to Aaron. For all Corey talks about, I will say that he seems to be a pretty empathetic guy, and definitely someone that Aaron will probably bond with on this series. So he starts crying. Aaron's crying while this is all going out, and he said by the time he was 16 years old, he literally felt like he was already an adult, even though he was still a child. Now when Jane goes up, and he's bawling, by the way, and it's very emotional, and Jane goes up and she pulls out a stack of $100 bills of Aaron on the photo for the bills, and then she pulls out, I can't even remember what the other thing was. It was money and something else, all related to money. And she says that she was busy being his manager, that she didn't look at him as a cash cow. And she says that It was it was a Parenting 101 book. And she said that I never read this book. And then she said the cash cow was actually her ex-husband's phrase for Aaron. It was never hers. She denied stealing any money. He has accused them of stealing like upwards of $20 million from them. He actually had to declare bankruptcy in 2013, and his parents declared bankruptcy while he was still performing. Yikes. She said that all the money she made while he was working was through the accountant. She never touched his money. It was never hers. She had nothing to do with it, and she solely blamed his father, who is now passed away. So it's like, he can't defend himself. And as she's talking about all of this, the doctors are like kind of pushing back at her. And she's like, no, Aaron has forgiven me for this. And it's like she has this look on her face like, right, Aaron, you tell them I have forgiven you for this. And it was like this, like, you better say yes. And Aaron's just like, no, like you can tell he's not going to even be down with what his mom is saying. And he's like, do you even know what happened to me? They garnished and levied my wages. So he's basically said that once he became an adult, the IRS followed up with him. And while he was working on a off-Broadway play, making less than $700 a month, he found out that he owed the IRS like over $100,000 in taxes from non-tax payment because his parents didn't pay his taxes as a child, which ultimately led to them garnishing his wages, filing levies, and having him to have to declare bankruptcy. And she is again denying it, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yep. And then she won't say that Aaron's the provider, but then admits while she's on there that he is the provider. I can tell why I can kind of get a sense now why Aaron is like he is, because I can tell that his mother just doesn't believe anything he has to say. And he's so desperate for people to believe him, to hear him, that he'll scream to anyone to get him to say anything. His mother, Jane, seems to like have no memory or gaslights and makes him feel like the reality he lived during that time was completely different than what it was. And it's so different, and she seems to take no responsibility, that I can now understand a lot better why he's having the issues that he's having. So he ends up telling his mom that the reason why he ultimately left the house was that because she was an alcoholic. And she was like, I never heard that. I never knew that until today. I never knew that you left because I was an alcoholic. All right, so Alexis points out that Jane just will not take any accountability, and Corey says that and Corey says that he doesn't trust her mom, Aaron's mom, at all. So when Corey gets up after Aaron is done melting down and Jane is defiantly like arguing about how she was the perfect mother, Corey comes up and he talks about how he was emancipated from his mother at age 15. When he opens up the gift, it's an empty memory book because his mother never saved any photos of him as a child. So he has no memories of being a child because he worked all of the time. Dr. Ish actually points out that he was forced into slave labor as a kid. And Corey talks about how his mother would lock him into a room when he was, a child, when he had scripts to learn, and that she wouldn't allow him to come out of the room until he had all of his lines memorized. And if he didn't have his lines memorized, she would beat him. And Dr. Ish says you were forced into slave labor. So Eden and Corey were both stuck in rooms as children, forced to read lines so that they could make money for their mother. Neither one of them have had a childhood, and Dr. Ish points out that they really need to get out of their childhood and move on and find like the next phase in life. Eden's gift was shackles and handcuffs, sort of as a symbol that he is resentful and sort of chained to what happened with Corey. And then Courtney, Corey's wife, got glue and matches because she could either be the glue that brings them together or the matches that blows them up. So she said that she loves both of them. Corey's wife actually seems to be really level-headed, super sweet, and seems to be wanting to do the best because she really likes both of them. And up until recently, they had not spoken up until the last year, Eden and Corey said that they hadn't spoken in 3 years, but they had been back together for about a year now. So then comes Alexis, and she opens up a broken home, and she immediately starts crying and admits that she's following in her mother's footsteps. She didn't want her life to turn out this way. She said that she has basically done exactly what her mother did. She's divorcing the husband of her father of her children's, or the father of her children. She's put their kids into broken homes. And she says that when she was a kid, like, she never felt like her mother acknowledged the fact that she was sad about what happened. She said her mother never showed her any sort of remorse, and that stuck with her. And then when Penelope went up there, she opened up a card that was actually given to her by Alexis, and it says, it was for Mother's Day, and it said, "I hate you and I blame you." And they asked Penelope what she felt about that, and she said she felt nothing because she doesn't know how to have emotions anymore. Sad. So then Laura comes up and she opens a box of shit. I'm not even kidding, like a box of poop, like the emoji poop kind of stuff. And she says that her father never believes her about anything, and if a child hit her, she said that he wouldn't believe her. He'd ask her, "Well, what did you do? I don't see a mark on your face. What's wrong with you? How'd you make that happen?" So basically, like, her saying stuff and her parents not believing her will be the center of this. Laura's dad also opens a box of shit, but he has more. And then her mom opens like a statue of 3 monkeys, one where they're closing their eyes, one where they're covering their ears, and one where they're covering their mouth. And she says that she doesn't want to say anything, see anything, or hear anything when it comes to them. So those were the souvenirs for the different families. After they all get their souvenirs out, they're all taken up and they have to pick up their rooms. So the themes of their rooms are Aaron and Jane get a room called Highway to Hell. Laura and her family are in a room called Out of Gas because they scream and shut down and they just call each other liars. Corey and Eden are on the high road because they are working right now on repairing their relationship, but there's still quite the divide. And Alexis and her mother are in a room called Detoured because both of their lives have taken detours they didn't expect. So there was some short confessionals in between all of this where Corey admits about he struggled with his emancipation and the guilt that he felt of leaving his brother. And Jane had a short confessional where she admitted that the 2020 episode with Barbara Walters was really terrible. She didn't like how they painted her as only caring about money for Aaron. Well, she kind of did, you guys. I don't know. The Carters are so messy, and like Jane Carter, she's gonna probably get on my nerves the most in this episode. So Laura, Michael, and Gloria end up in a room that's a circus. Corey's room is the Wild Wild West. He's a vegan, vegetarian. There's like carcasses. He gets pissed off about it. But Dr. Ish says it's a symbolic of the lawlessness of his childhood. The Grand Canyon theme in the room is the divide that has been created between him and Eden, and that they are stuck in their childhoods because they were beaten as children and they don't have mothers. And so they don't have a mother that like they have a relationship with. So the goal is to bring them together. When Aaron and his mother, Jane, get into the room, it's like this high life, like big, like fancy, like they're out in New York City. And one of the quotes on the wall says, "All of the kids have done drugs with their father," and it's Jane. And then there's quotes of Aaron talking about how all he wanted was a mother, and he didn't want like a celebrity. He didn't want a manager. He just wanted a mother that would spend time with him. Aaron said he grew up in hotels. He wanted attention as a teenager, and he didn't want to be the breadwinner, but he was. And then he gets into a fight with his mother, and he's like, "I raised myself in my 20s because I worked my whole childhood," which is actually kind of sad if you think about it. Like, he really thinks like he had to do the most of his growing up after his career ended and raise himself and sort of go through all of that in his 20s. And his mother was like, "Well, you were already raised by that. Stop it, blah, blah, blah." And he was like, "I was on tour all the time, Mom." And she's like, "You weren't on tour that much." And she's like, "You're no Justin Bieber." Can you imagine? And he's, by the way, older than Justin Bieber. And then Aaron points out that to her, and he's like, "I'm older than Justin. I paved the way for Justin. Justin stole my haircut." And if you do recall, they both had the same like shaggy haircut, and they had the same look. Like, Justin really was like a replica of Aaron. Aaron is about 7 years older than Justin. Aaron basically says that he grew up too fast, too much partying. His mother wasn't a good mother. He called her a terrible mother. And he said one of the most heartbreaking parts of his childhood was he had to go on MTV Cribs. And 10 minutes before MTV came to film the home, his parents told him they were getting a divorce, and then he still had to go on cribs. Terrible. Laura and her family are in a circus, and they're on a roller coaster. They're on a merry-go-round. They're going nowhere. Laura says that she's like juggling to try to keep this up. Dr. Ish comes in to kind of talk about the allegations that Michael doesn't believe that she was molested, and that he failed as the one thing he could have done as her father was believed her and stood up for her and defended her. And Michael doesn't really get it. But he says that he is open to learning about it. But he said it was 10 years after the fact. Like, what was I supposed to do at that point? And Dr. Ish was like, you should have defended your daughter. And then Laura brings up a situation where her parents literally decided that they were going to take her kids to Lake Tahoe. Laura had decided they weren't going to go to Lake Tahoe, but her parents just basically picked the kids up from school, took them on a trip, didn't tell them where they were going, didn't tell them where they were going to stay, and it became this whole big story in the tabloids. And Michael, to this day, doesn't seem like he did anything wrong because it's his grandparents and he has rights to his kids, to his grandchildren, he said. And then it ends with Aaron and Jane fighting again. And Aaron going on and on and on about how selfish she is, what an addict she is, what an alcoholic she is. And then Jane's like, I just want Aaron to admit that he is resentful and he just needs to move on. And then as Aaron's trying to like talk about his childhood, his mother's like, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And then she literally says to him, you lie about, or like, you're 90% of what you say is not true. And he's like, so you're basically calling me a liar. And she's like, no, you exaggerate. And he's like, you're calling me a liar. And he goes, nope. And then he goes, it's all my fault. I'm a crackhead. I made no money and I'm no Justin Bieber. And then that's the end of the episode. Wow, you guys. Wow. So my thoughts here are that Aaron is so tragically stuck in his childhood. Corey is still tragically stuck in his childhood. Laura's parents actually kind of remind me of my parents, and not because of what happened, just because of the dynamic between the mom and the dad. I like the peacemaker stuff. And Alexis and her mother, I don't know. Like, I'm interested to see more about this Alexis stuff. I hope Alexis talks more about her divorce because she's returning now to the Housewives, and so as a part of that too, she's talking about her divorce to Jim. And I actually watched the Housewives back then when she was on the show, and she always drove me nuts because of how judgmental they were of women that worked outside of the home. But now she's actually saying that the show ultimately ended her getting a divorce because she finally had something outside of her husband and was working, and Jim didn't like that. And so I'll be interested to see if they talk more about that and how that compares to what Penelope went through, because sometimes history does repeat itself. More than anything, I'm just excited to see what more we learn about Aaron, what more we learn about Corey. I love these kinds of shows because I love to hear about how people's pasts affect their futures and how they can actually overcome things to get better. In some cases, these shows don't really do a lot. I will be having Matt Byer, who was actually on a season 2 seasons ago with his ex-girlfriend Amber Portwood, to actually talk about what the entire experience is. And I'll actually be asking him to maybe join me on some of these recaps to explain to me some of these drills, because some of the drills that they do on these shows are repeats season to season. And when I have spoken to Matt, he said it's literally the most real show he's ever been a part of. No script. It was super raw. Everything that happened. And they really do break you down to build you back up. And he said he got a lot out of it. So I'll be bringing him on soon this week to talk about his experience, and then have him come back for some recap shows if he is interested. So let me know if you'll plan to watch, if you thought this recap was interesting, or if you are just like, nope, not going to watch, just going to go to you for your recaps. All right, you guys, I'll be back later. Bye.